Joining us to unpack BHP Billiton's strong operating performance is Jacques Botha. He's a chief mining economist at Afriforesight. Jacques, thank you so much for making the time to join us. 9% in terms of the production overall, in terms of the increase in production, to be more precise. Given the operating environment, is this a number we should be excited about?
Nozipu, that's a good question, given the operating environment. I think it was a good number. It's a good number. There is a negative that the prices over this period, although their production went up by 9%, some of the commodity prices, and my office is still unpacking everything there, but some of the commodity prices have actually over that period fallen. So the net effect in money terms is not going to be that spectacular.
Maybe let's just staying with maybe looking at their coal production, and in particular looking at Queensland. Again, here we are seeing that they've exceeded expectations in terms of what they've brought out from under the ground. And yet here in South Africa, we hear that there is a possibility of them pulling out of their coal businesses. Maybe, Jacques, give us an insight in terms of what is it about the Australian environment that allows BHP to do exceedingly well in the coal sector that they're not able to achieve here in South Africa?
Well, first of all, Nozipu, that was a metallurgical coal. The big production was metallurgical coal, and we are not very well endowed in South Africa with metallurgical coal. We have, but not so well as in Australia. Their thermal coal, which is what they were mostly involved in South Africa, they also didn't do so well. I think they were up 1%, 1% up on thermal coal. But they do anticipate to increase that. The problem with both the coals, thermal coal and coking coal, the price has actually not been doing well over the last year. So it wasn't very, all coal miners did actually not do well. But Australia has an incredibly favorable characteristic for bulk commodities, and that is that they are very close to the market. The Asian market, particularly first the Chinese market, buys more than 50% of these commodities at the current stage. And then also close to other markets, emerging markets like India now. So that is really their big advantage, being so well located on the coal sector and also on the iron ore sector.
And Jacques, maybe going to iron ore now that you have raised it, and one is compelled to draw comparisons with Kumba, given that we saw their numbers coming out yesterday, and highlighting that the 16% decline we saw in Kumba iron ore was to a large extent because of a downturn in iron ore prices. Would not the same hold for BHP Billiton?
Yes, very good point. So I looked at two different numbers, but it seems that their volumes went up by 20%, the iron ore production, but they see their iron ore price having gone down by 6%. Some people calculate the iron ore price have gone down by 10 to even 12% over that period. So the net effect is not going to be so good, but they still, because of this incredible ramp up of production, which Kumba didn't manage to do for their previous financial year, where they've ramped up production by 20%. So they produced, so the increase, their volume increase was higher than the price decline. So they're still okay.
And of course, Jacques, you've touched on the point of China and how BHP is relatively closer to China when it comes to getting a lot of these commodities into that particular market. But the broader picture in terms of the economic growth expectations from China seems a bit worrisome. Do you think that in the long term this might be something that might actually bite them?
China, if they focus everything, yes, that's a very, you make a good point there. We see China, but we see China commodity demand, which is basically government infrastructure spending for the next 6 months, to be very high to help the other parts of the economy that's not doing so well. So this year, it's going to be very good for Billiton from China. Next year, we see China demand actually declining as the balance of the other part of the economy comes back in the picture. But by then, you could see some increased demand from other areas in Asia. Particularly a sleeping giant is India. Well, Indonesia is also quite exciting now that they've got a pro-fair business leader in charge there, a political leader in charge, Jokowi, who sort of now was declared as unanimously as the president. So there are other areas in Asia. So the demand for commodities, and also The demand for oil pipelines, slightly more north, to Russia and places like that. So the people, the commodities that China produce, the metallurgical and iron ore, which goes into steel, we see that demand still being very strong. We see that demand growing by about 5% a year. So there is a bit of a risk there that there could be an oversupply. And the people who are producing the cheapest are the Australians, so maybe they're going to disrupt the market of the other producers.
Jacques, they've also come out and said they've had 6 major projects that were completed, and they've got another 2 projects in the pipeline, and overall painting a picture that the future looks bright. Are you buying that story?
I'm buying that story in the short term. Over the long term, you will notice that they actually have cut down on sort of longer term value expenditure, for example, geological surveys and things like that. But one can excuse them by saying that they know Australia's geology very well, and where the iron ore and the coking coal and maybe even the thermal coal is waiting and lying, some manganese, they could be prepared for that. They spend most of their development costs now, if you see there, it seems to be in South America, for the copper story. Coppers, of course, that is my big concern. Everybody, of course, Glencore is talking to the guys and trying to tell them to slow down production. They've been saying that for about a year now. And everybody, you'll see, everybody sort of produces, they announce lower production targets, and then they surprise you by producing more, because they know if they produce too much, but everybody wants to make a profit. And the margins are so good on iron ore and on copper. So copper is another story. The price has also not done well. Actually, the price has fallen last year, and we actually do not see the price doing well. So that's a big business of theirs as well, copper in South America.
I think that's a great...
so that's a bit of a problem.
I think that's a great insight in terms of watching those production targets so that we don't get overly excited about the numbers when they come out. But finally, I was just sitting just in an earlier interview, we were discussing with David Shapiro about the ranking, the attractiveness between BHP, Glencore, Xstrata and Kumba Iron Ore. And he gave me his with BHP right at the top, followed by Glencore and then Kumba. How does your ranking sit?
I'll actually shift Glencore above Billiton just because they're more nimble, they can move fast. This is a very volatile market. The commodities vary, and Glencore can easily sell a mine that they're stuck with, or they easily buy another mine, or they just trade with the commodities as well. So they can cover themselves, their losses much better. Billiton is more a traditional miner. They sink a mine and they just put their money there and they wait and they work very hard at it. And where they are doing very well. There's another interesting story, though, and this is the entry in the petrochemical market, which is becoming a big part of BHP Billiton's income. Now that looking at that, but Glencore is also in that game. But looking at that game, that part, I think that's BHP Billiton's secret trump card. That's where they're really going to make the money.
Jacques,
on the petrochemical products.
Jacques, thank you so much for joining us. So it is copper and petrochemicals. Those seem to be the trump cards that Jacques Botha thinks that BHP has up their sleeves. That's a big thank you. He's a chief mining economist at Afriforesight.